kids, do you like anime? I like anime so much, I'm about to talk about it for fun! It's way too early in the video to say the F word without getting demonetized. Well, if you're new here, this is Kaiser's TV 23 of 23, where I go over 23 TV shows from 2023. And if you weren't paying attention to the title or the beginning of this video, this time it's anime. And I am psyched because not only do we have 10 full segments, we also have 11 honorable mentions. So strap in for the final list, and please try not to get too mad down in the comments. They're just cartoons. Shangri-La Frontier. Anime about full immersion VR that don't trap its players can sometimes feel like cheating the isekai format. All the lush and varied environments, characters, fantasy trappings, and of course, stats and abilities, without all the overwrought drama and tired storylines. On the flip side, this risks the stakes feeling dismissively low. So to keep someone like me invested, the premise has to compensate with impressive in-game design, relatable characters, solid presentation, and ridiculously sexy bunny men. And luckily, Shangri-La Frontier ticks every box, as well as providing a surprisingly unique approach to the genre via our main character, Rakuro Sanraku Hizutome. This guy isn't just good at video games. This mad lad is good at bad video games. Cheap, buggy, unfair, nigh unplayable messes that have forged him in low-res fire textures into a player more aimbot than man. A true kusuge or trash game connoisseur, meaning that when he finally puts himself into a game with an actual QA team, it's like a battle shonen pro tag taking off their weighted clothes. And the story is undoubtedly buoyed by Sanraku. He's never so rotten that you feel conflicted siding with him when he finds exploits in the system, but he's never so milquetoast and well-natured that you find him boring. His most appealing trait, honestly, is his gamer passion. His enthusiasm is instantly relatable, even if his tastes lean in a more peculiar direction. If you are also passionate about games and game design, you understand him and why he's so excited to explore these half-baked worlds, and why you're excited as he charges headlong into the god game experience of Shangri-La Frontier. Now, Shangri-La's world is not the most fascinating of its genre. Its character designs, lore, and general aesthetic all vary in quality, but they can be inspired and are never boring. The real value here is watching Sanraku and his friends manipulate and exploit SLF's mechanics, while navigating its engaging, and often amusing, fantasy world. And it's all elevated by a regular supply of creatively fun, flashy fight scenes. While I don't see them topping many tier lists, SLF is far from phoning it in. And I'm constantly impressed by the Saga on display and an OST that slaps like an Australian TV drama. One thing about the story that does occasionally frustrate me though is how often it gets sidetracked. On one hand, watching Sanraku get thrust into conflict after conflict, often stumbling into unique scenarios and game-changing upgrades, is entertaining in its own right. And that is all very true to the MMO spirit. But it can often feel like Sanraku, and thus the story, is being pulled in so many places at once that the best part of the story, the exploration and exploitation of the system, suffers for it. And while she's not bad, Rei Saiger Zero's Saga is not that interesting to me. Mostly because she feels like the same joke over and over, and that punchline feels more like a love tap. I'm really hoping the series will shake her up and give us something meatier with her down the line, because much like a horse with a broken bridle, she needs a new bit. But for now, I can definitely say that Shangri-La Frontier is no grind. It's a funny, lighthearted, well-animated, and written foray into the world of full immersion VR gaming and its most dedicated dorks. By the way, it's always really funny to me in series like these where they use original properties, but you know dicks for dollars that licensed full immersion VR games would sell insanely well. Like imagine being on Luffy's crew, or joining the Avengers with your own superpower, or dating sim with the cast of Beastars. Tell me I'm wrong so I can call you a liar. Campfire cooking in another world with my absurd skill. Since I just got done talking about my favorite not really an isekai, let's talk about my favorite isekai of all time. Campfire cooking in another world with my absurd skill. Because while I might be as good at cooking as I am at cunnilingus, this series had me locked in by the end of episode 1. With the story of a pan-savvy Japanese man summoned to a fantasy world where its current culinary state is as dire as its monsters. Campfire cooking presses start to skip the prologue, immediately introducing us to the group of heroes, whisked away from our world to save the kingdom of Rageseger. Except our main man with a pan, Makoto, isn't equipped with the skills of mage or monk, but market. an online supermarket to be exact, an ability which allows him to order food and ingredients and other miscellaneous items from his own world, making him the de facto best cook in this world. But before he can become Gordon Ramsay Bolton, his absurd skill draws the attention of the lupine lord himself, Fenrir. Somewhat foppish, often fearsome, constantly funny, and always furry, Fenrir, or Fel, takes a liking to Makota's sizzling steaks and fried fare, essentially bullying him into making a magical binding contract in which Fel offers his undying protection to young Makota, as long as the human literally caters to his every wolfy whim. His particular character writing strikes a great balance between his bossy, food-motivated nature and him trying to actively work with Makota, growing his abilities for both their sakes and adapting to being a better traveling companion. When he's not literally tearing the most terrifying monsters of this world asunder on late-night battle benders. And while Fel is a fantastic character in his own right, they're also joined by Sui, a particularly peculiar slime who hungers for treats and blood.
Father, I crave violence.
The slime child is the perfect mixture of adorable and morbid, eager to please his father figure, polishing plates and pooping potions, while champing at the bit to take part in mob mutilation, quickly growing in strength over time in a way that should probably be more concerning than they treat it. And as this unlikely trio explores the world, they find different ways to exploit the market, especially as Makota's barking bodyguard bombards him with bodies worth boku bucks. But our good boy, Makota, not Fel, is quick to ensure they don't act too brashly, so as not to completely crash the economy. But a major selling point of the series isn't its characters or its setting, but rather, good old-fashioned food porn. The creator's ability to construct scrumptious-sounding meals out of classic and modern fantasy creatures, utilizing a wide variety of seasonings and cooking tools provided via Makota's ability, is something magical. While I can't personally speak to the validity of any of these recipes, I found myself right alongside Fel, mouth-watering at these otherworldly, yet comforting concoctions. Of course, anime food porn is only as good as its presentation, and Campfire cooking manages to clear that bar every time. I love this show, truly. It's in my top 20 anime of all time, and it's a goddamned isekai, a genre I've tuned out of so hard I broke the knob. But the way that it indulges in and explores classic fantasy tropes through the lens of cooking, all the while balancing impeccable comedy and character progression, is absolutely impressive. It avoids the trappings of lesser isekai, never feeling overwrought or edgy for the sake of it. It takes its deliberate time to allow Makota and Sui to grow naturally, and for Fel to show off different facets of his legendary self. From town to dungeon, every new location is an opportunity to see our heroes develop and grow closer. And every monster encountered is a new recipe for the viewer to feast on with their eyes and hearts. When I'm not laughing, I'm salivating. And when I'm not salivating, I'm cheering on our wonderful little slime child to commit another war crime. And frankly, I can't imagine wanting more. While desperately wanting more. Oh, the goddesses? Yeah, no, they're fine. No, I will not elaborate. Mashle Season 1. I would never have watched this show if it weren't for my friend Yama getting me into it. And it is funny. Unabashedly funny. And the people calling it Harry Potter meets One Punch Man aren't exactly wrong either. Unfortunately, its supporting cast has kind of bring down the show for me. Everyone else just feels generic or like a walking gimmick. I mean, the main character, Mash Burndead, yes, that's actually his name, is also a walking gimmick, but the physical comedy and absurd dedication to said gimmick is enough to make up for that. But still, I got a kick out of that first season, though I'm not exactly sure I'm gonna come back for the second. Unless it's to listen to that motherfucking theme song! Ranking of Kings Season 2. Ranking of Kings Season 1 would have gotten 20 minutes on this list, easy. Season 2, on the other hand, or rather Season 1.5, is a collection of canon short stories that are meant to tide us over until Season 2 proper. But don't let that stop you from watching it. It isn't filler, and it's still Ranking of Kings, top to bottom. It's charming, world-building, and helps fill in some significant gaps from Season 1. Also, Boji continues to be best boy. Heavenly Delusion, or Tengoku Daimakyo. Heavenly Delusion is a show where if you're new to it, the less said the better. Going into it without any preconceptions and experiencing this dystopia for yourself is highly recommended. But if you're curious about my thoughts, it's one of my favorite sci-fi stories in a long while that slowly and methodically drip feeds you information about its apocalyptic setting in a deeply rewarding manner. But its most impressive skill is how that information can retroactively change scenes from prior episodes in exciting and often devastating ways. Luckily, the quality of the series is not solely dependent on its twists and turns. Its cast is exceptionally solid. While not every character is a standout, our main leads are infinitely likable. Following their adventure and watching them bounce off one another is my absolute favorite part of the show, as we watch them grow to better understand and rely on one another, and build a beautiful bond. The rest of the primary cast is also varied and fascinating, many of them multifaceted with compelling and often heartbreaking arcs, all helping tell a greater story that is as intriguing as it is harrowing. And atop it all, the creature design is simply out of this world, giving us nightmarish, disturbing enemies, as threatening as they are unsettling. But it isn't until you fully understand what they actually are that the true weight of their very existence sets in. Though, content warning, this is not a show for the faint of heart. I can't express how much I was ready for and still found myself massively uncomfortable with some parts of its narrative. But if you embrace the bleak, you will find a gripping story about community, identity, and survival. To top it all off, it's all hauntingly beautiful, with some stellar direction and a wondrous soundtrack. Just a heavenly production, top to bottom. Also, it's not every series where the best boy and best girl are technically the same character. Pokémon Concierge. This honestly feels like it should have been a movie, because while I absolutely adored my time in this beautiful little stop-motion island, much like an actual vacation, it's over way too soon. As someone who just can't get enough of watching people just living in the world of Pokemon, I saw Detective Pikachu day one. This was an absolutely adorable time. But more importantly, I want her job and I want her Psyduck. Pluto. Naoki Urasawa is, without a doubt, one of my favorite mangaka. Between Master Keaton, Monster, 20th Century Boys, the man has easily earned the title of master of his craft. But when it comes to Pluto, we actually get to see something different from him. Here, he isn't telling a wholly original story, but rather he reimagines the greatest robot on Earth arc from Tetsuwan Atom, known as Astro Boy in the West. He also moves Atom/Astro Boy to a secondary role, instead focusing on an android detective named Gesicht. Now I'm probably about to draw a lot of heat with what I'm about to say, but please bear with me. I think the Netflix anime adaptation in some ways falls short of its source material. Not in every moment, not in every way, but I found myself at times struggling a bit with its production, and his masterful artistry just not translating that well to the small screen. I mean, don't get me wrong, the story is still a standout. Watching as these androids, referred to specifically as robots in this series, struggle with the depth of human emotion is as intriguing as it was in the manga. The slow unraveling of its mystery, with its complications and travesties aplenty, keeps you on the edge of your seat. And watching classic characters from Tetsuwan Atom reimagined in a more mature story is also a treat for longtime anime fans. I cannot express how much I appreciate a complicated and meaningful narrative about how every emotion one feels is necessary to the human experience. Hate, sorrow, love, joy, longing, etc. To hate is to be human, but to love is to be further human still. And that narrative here is strong and stellar. But something about the presentation, both in terms of its visuals and direction, didn't always work with me. I know it seems like a strange critique, as the series has been lauded for its art and animation, but it just feels like a lot of its darker imagery and heady concepts, in my humble opinion, worked better on the page, with Urasawa's art in full swing. Nothing makes this more apparent than how goofy the main antagonist Pluto feels on screen, compared to his manga counterpart, where Urasawa bridges the gap between his original design and something more modern and infinitely more terrifying. As well, and this is a problem that plagues the source material, but I would argue is made worse with its adaptation, I found the series' presentation of emotions as this almost tangible, quantifiable element to be heavy-handed, almost to the point of parody. This is emphasized most greatly with Uran's entire character being focused around her being able to sense emotions and constantly drone on about them.
Uran, what does the scouter say about his sadness level?
Now, I still highly recommend Pluto, anime or manga, but if you can read the manga first, I highly recommend doing so, because, and I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with this, but it doesn't feel like the anime elevates the source material in any particular way above what Urasawa already accomplished on the page, and in some places comes up meaningfully short. Still, some anime would kill for an adaptation with this much love and care. Also a cast with Sungwon Cho talking to Keith motherfucking David? Oh my god! Spy Family Season 2. Praise be, for we are finally blessed with an actual your storyline with real assessing. And let me tell you, it is spectacular. It's also the highlight of the season, while everything else is more of a mixed bag. While it definitely still continues to be funny, it's not quite as engaging as its first season was. Still, its best is pretty phenomenal, and I'm locked in for Season 3. Also, shout out to it having maybe the best opening and ending of the year. Though the opening does sound a little auto-tuned. Buddy Daddies. Look. Buddy Daddies is we've got Spy Family at home, all right? But it's more than that. It's a heartfelt, funny, above-average story about two dads with a case of the not gays doing the best they can for their little girl. It's also one of the few wholly original anime on this list, so I also have to give it love for that. If you want some decent action, above-average comedy, and a heartfelt story about parenthood and changing oneself for the better, give Buddy Daddies a try. Scott Pilgrim takes off. The worst part about being a Scott Pilgrim fan is my first name also being Scott. Because man, this fucking guy. And yeah, I did relate to him and his story. A thoughtless, lackadaisical, feckless millennial stumbling through life, my few hapless brain cells more focused on nerdcore bullshit than anything relevant or useful, having to learn the hard way that my actions impact others in meaningful ways, and without proper empathy and hard work, I would most likely end up alone. I instantly became a fan of the once merely a graphic novel, now multimedia franchise. That is so fucking bizarre to say. And the subsequent game and movie only shot that fanaticism to the moon, creating a third hole. But does Scott Pilgrim Takes Off take that love back down to earth, burning up in the atmosphere upon re-entry? Did its bait and switch leave me cursing the very existence of rugs, as it pulls the promise of a fully animated adaptation out from beneath me, instead offering a story that replaces Scott as the lead with a girl with hair like this? No, I fucking love this show. But admittedly, it took me a minute. Because, truthfully, I was pretty excited at the premise of finally getting the entirety of the Scott Pilgrim graphic novels adapted. The movie, while an absolute gem of filmmaking and a spiritually faithful, if abridged, retelling, also either loses or truncates many memorable characters and plotlines. Do you even know who this is? Or this? Or this? And unfortunately, its ending just doesn't hit the same as the comic because of it. So when Netflix's Scott Pilgrim pulled a Netflix's Masters of the Universe, which is a lot better than a lot of you gave it credit for, Fight You Fuck Me, I was disappointed and frustrated. And I just want him back. But soon, I realized that the show doesn't actually replace Scott Pilgrim with Ramona, but instead acts as a sequel series to the original. See, Scott Pilgrim isn't an adaptation, but rather a love letter to all of Scott Pilgrim. One of the first ways that you see this is in the casting. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I pitched a respectable fit when Netflix announced that they were bringing back the original cast of the movie. I'm not really a fan of screen actors doing voiceover on a good day, and a fair selection of the film's cast, while highly effective for its interpretation of those characters, don't exactly fit perfectly in with more comic-faithful renditions of the characters, chief among them being Michael Cera and Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Scott and Ramona respectively. But this Scott Pilgrim, the story, not the character, is calling back to its previous three incarnations. And one of its most prominent pulls is the movie's cast and how they shaped those characters. Because while Michael Cera is definitely giving a much more animated, comic-accurate, and straight-up adorable performance as Scott, Chris Evans' Lucas Lee feels much closer to his movie counterpart. But fascinatingly, all of them feel, in one way or another, like a careful combination of their different interpretations, regardless of how much said interpretations diverged. And these renditions lead us down a very different story. One where Matthew Patel, seemingly, kills Scott Pilgrim, the character, not the story, instilling in him an indefatigable confidence that emboldens him to challenge and handily defeat Gideon G-Man Graves. Which is fascinating to me, because it highlights early on how their insecurity and obsession only served to bind and hinder them. Once Matthew was free of his flowers-flavored obsession and actually believed in himself, he became nigh unstoppable. Matty P got the glow up of the century here, and Satya Sorab Babha is having a blast, and he is far from the only ex who gets to shine here. Every single Evil X has their histories with Ramona explored, giving us a look at just how Ramona hurt them and her an opportunity to confront those past mistakes and provide them all sweet, necessary closure. And while Lucas Lee's entire episode is a Gynax-inspired Sakugasm, Todd Ingram's asymmetrically torrid love affair with Wallace Wells, my beloved, is positively hilarious, and watching Gideon rising from the graves after getting his goose cooked helps give him appreciable pathos, it's Roxy who offers the greatest emotional highlight and fight of the show. The video rental store provides us with an all-out brawl through different genres and a blink and you miss it everything everywhere all at once reference that ends with a heart-rending apology from Ramona. And some unabashed, absolutely on-brand fan service. Speaking of Evil X's, Lucas Lee X Gideon. Who knew we all needed that? I didn't, but I do. And in an even more interesting twist, the story dedicates an entire subplot to Knives Chow, pairing her up, platonically, with Steven Stills, after finding out she's a musical prodigy. Considering her journey up until now in the franchise, it was just so refreshing to watch her learn more about herself without the curse of Scott Pilgrim, both the story and the character. But returning to Ramona, as mentioned before, the story centers around her as the main character, charged with solving the mystery of Scott's supposed death/actual kidnapping. Her character was never static or shallow in her previous incarnations, though I will say the movie does stumble a bit in that regard. But here, this plot acts not only as a vehicle to explore her troubled history and redeem her evil exes, it's also a way for her to grow and confront her biggest flaw, her inability to commit. Though, I do have to say that once the big mystery is revealed, things do go a little bit off the rails, even if the train ultimately makes it to the station. When we're whisked to the future, we find old Scott, who has separated from Ramona after things apparently went sour 13 years after they married. And while there are some spectacularly subtle and not so subtle gaming references littered about future Wallace's house, interesting lore setup for Wallace's future husband, and the Katsunagi twins busting out their best Jet Set Radio cosplay while Will Forte performs a cover of Konyawa Hurricane from Bubblegum Crisis. What the fuck? It sets up for a bit of a narratively confusing and somewhat underwhelming final act. But while I'm talking about Konyawa Hurricane, seriously, where the fuck does that pull even come from? The music in the show is also a standout. There may not be another contemporary Japanese band more suited to a Scott Pilgrim anime OP than Nekrai Talking, which sprinkles in plenty of cheeky, relevant references for experienced anime watchers. And the needle drops in the show are damn near impeccable. The Metric coming back to perform a dance cover of I Will Remember You already starts us off with the right energy. But the moment we're hit with Liam Lynch's United States of Whatever, I felt like it stepped back in goddamn time, only to get hit with a double whammy that literally made me shriek while watching it. Dead Kennedy's Police Truck. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater references in Scott Pilgrim is the chocolate cock and my peanut butter pussy. Oh hey, and there's Nick Frost and Simon Pegg as these two security guards, a reference to Edgar Wright directing the movie, and how they were apparently supposed to be the vegan police in said movie, but couldn't because of scheduling conflicts. That's neat. Oh, and Weird Al is the episode narrator, because why the fuck not? And while I've talked about the casting being a callback to the history of Scott Pilgrim via the movie, it's with Anamanaguchi that we find a callback squarely to the game, and in glorious form. Sometimes understated, sometimes over the top, Anamanaguchi scores this show to perfection. And hearing classic Sex Bomb and Metric back in the studio truly makes the series feel like a complete amalgamation of the franchise. Plus, that cover of God Only Knows is a great way to end the show. And visually, I cannot imagine a better looking version of said show. Science Sato taps into the comics' already anime-inspired designs, reimagining them in ways that keep all their distinct features but subtly simplifying them and rounding them out, allowing for bigger expressions that encompass both Western comics and anime. They're also animated using inconsistent yet bold line art, mimicking traditional brushwork. Watching these characters in motion is an absolute treat from start to finish, especially during some of the most exciting and mind-boggling bouts of Sakuga on this whole list. Look at Lucas Lee. Look at him! No, really, look at him. And all of this is accompanied by gorgeously painted backgrounds and super effective post-processing. The use of chromatic aberration, camera bokeh, and selective focus on characters and objects gives the show a strikingly unique feel that's also highly reminiscent of 80s and 90s anime. However, like I said, while the series manages to ride high and deliver some exceptional standout moments from beginning to end, throwing more bones to the audience than an army of angry Marowaks, it does stumble in places. As previously elaborated on, this is the movie's cast, and while some actors definitely have more experience in front of a mic instead of under it, others definitely struggle a little bit. Mary Elizabeth Winstead's more neutral portrayal conflicts a lot with her visuals here. Mass is the same with Aubrey Plaza as Julie, Jason Schwartzman as Gideon, and Mark Webber as Stephen Stills. All of them still stellar actors in their own right, mind you, but their vocal performances are the least consistent of the bunch. Meanwhile, Johnny Simmons' portrayal of young Neil is so bad, it's transcendent. And to this day, I'm still not sure how intentional that was. All I know is, with his expanded role and mind-boggling performance, he's one of the funniest characters in the show. Though, weirdly, I'm still not sure where I sit with Will Forte as Old Scott. And speaking of Old Scott, the finale is just a little bit of a letdown for me. On one hand, giving us a story not only showing Scott as an evil ex, but showing us that he had the potential of being the absolute worst of them all is inspired. His obsession with his previous relationship, Envy Adams, showed a hint at just how consumed he can become over a messy breakup. So to watch this breakup transform him into evil Ryu if he ate Akuma is pitch perfect. The final battle also gives everyone a chance to shine, and does what the movie should have done by having Scott and Ramona defeating the final villain. But on the other hand, it seemingly fumbles with Ramona's side of the story. By framing Scott as a man who devolves into a demon consumed by loss and grief over the slightest hitch in their relationship in the future, it's hard to side with the plot when it vaguely implies that Ramona's fault here is, somehow, not wanting to put up with that shit. It is implied the future can and will be changed, but even this is still muddled by how some scenes are framed. As well, the series casually GDQs Scott's own development. Since the series, understandably, doesn't have room to fit his arc in, he's thrust into a shoddy simulation of that story, while also watching the events of this series play out through the eyes of Robot 01, until he rejoins the plot. This does unfortunately feel like we're getting a stronger Ramona for a weaker Scott by the end of the show, especially as we get a quick rug sweep of Knives' entire conflict with him. And speaking of hand-waving, they only pay the bare minimum amount of lip service to just how rotten Gideon was. And the Katsunagi twins, while vital to the plot, do kind of feel like they get shafted again. But honestly, they do their job. And Julie and Gordon do make for a potentially stellar villain couple. However, despite any of my issues, I still rewatched Scott Pilgrim twice over, just so I could relive all of its best moments, and my love for it grew each time. As someone who loved Scott Pilgrim growing up and still has a great fondness for it to this day, it does genuinely fill me with joy to watch this franchise spend time exploring and expanding characters who felt underserved by the story. And while this story is a bit messy and unbalanced, it also feels distinctly passionate. Like Brian Lee O'Malley and Ben David Gibson just had to tell this final tale to round it all out. And much like every other rendition of Scott Pilgrim, despite all of its flaws, I still adore it. And while they don't plan on a second season, nor do they really need one, I certainly wouldn't say no to more in the future. I also wouldn't say no to a Wallace Wells spinoff. I mean, Takes Off already spent a good amount of its runtime indulging in just how powerful Wallace is. Like a gay SCP. God, I love Kieran Culkin. Revenger. This is Gen Urobuchi's B material, so if you're not a fan of his A material, you may not get a lot out of this. But if you're into the idea of a squad of colorful hitmen and stories of crime, revenge, and dudes getting absolutely fucking wrecked, then you might get a kick out of Revenger. I mean, I willingly finished it, so that's gotta say something.
Konnichiwa, Tomodachi Tachi. This video is brought to you by our sponsors at Tokyo Treat and Sakura Co. Delicious Japanese snacks delivered straight to your door, straight from the land of the rising sun. Use the code Team4Star at checkout to get $5 off your first box. Let's take a look at what we got this month, because we are celebrating the burst of spring with Sakura Snacktastic with Tokyo Treat and the beauty of Sakura with Sakura Co. Tokyo Treat loves to bring you delicious Japanese snacks that you will only find in Japanese convenience stores, giving you a taste of Japan right in your very home, like these delicious matcha latte Kit Kats. I'm intrigued by this pie. Oh, they're tiny. Here's another tiny pie. There's more, and then enough to share. They're really good. Surprisingly moist on the inside. And of course, gotta wash it down with this delicious Mitsuya cider. I don't know why I'm saying delicious. I haven't tasted it yet. Yeah, it was delicious. Meanwhile, with Sakura Co., you are getting delicious artisanal Japanese snacks made by the snack masters of each individual province, meant to show off the delicious taste of local Japan. Each box comes with up to 20 delicious snacks for you to try and enjoy for your very own. I love all of the treats in Tokyo Treat, but Sakurako always has like these really unique things. Like, this one has steps to it. Does it tell me how to do? I know what would tell me how to do. The handy dandy snack booklet that comes with each and every box. Look at me integrating shit. I'm so good at advertisements. See, I now know that this is Sakura Honey Kuzumochi. Okay, so I'm supposed to open this up. Now, if only I were smart enough to have grabbed a utensil. Oh God, I'm like the end of a hentai. Okay, I recommend eating that with a spoon, but that was good. Sakurako also comes packaged with wonderful little delightful pieces of tableware for you to display or use as you see fit. This is a little cat with flowers. And Sakurako also comes paired with a wonderful, delicious tea. This one is a Sakura Blossom tea. You can see getting all like flowery in the bottom there. That pairs extremely well with all of their selections. Ooh, that is a delicate and lovely flavor. We've gotten a lot of green teas. This is the first flower tea we've gotten from them. I like it a lot. So thank you once again to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring this video. Make sure to use the code Team4Star at checkout to get $5 off your first box. And now on to the video that you clicked on. I'm gonna go eat more snacks.
Oshi no Ko. I hate idols, not them personally, not as people necessarily, but what they represent. An industry that commodifies people, specifically young women, as marketable objects, detached from reality and modeled to be as safe and attractive as possible for a very specific lucrative audience, their entire lives dictated and carefully curated to the point of absurdity, vying for the spotlight on a stage intentionally made to be as narrow as possible in order to facilitate destructive competitiveness as they sing songs meticulously constructed in a laboratory. Also, they may be unceremoniously shuffled off as soon as they age out and replaced with younger, fresher meat. Now, obviously, none of this is exclusive to idols. It's a problem with the entertainment industry at large. But you can probably see why I might have A5 Kobe beef with idol-themed entertainment specifically. So a story that purports to center itself around these faults piqued my interest. But it being written by Aka Akasaka, the brilliant mind behind Kaguya-sama Love is War, is what really held my attention. What I was not ready for was the main conceit of the series, something that, in many other stories, might have lost me right out the gate. But without going into details, I actually found myself blown away by how the story utilizes this narrative device. Also, it could double down on scrutinizing an exploitative and competitive industry that systemically devalues human life, all in service of the almighty yen. From word go, with what might be the best opening song ever from Yoasobi, who steadfastly refuses to miss. The show is a beautiful, phenomenally directed and nuanced exploration into the entertainment industry, examining child actors, social media influencers, reality television, pop idols, and most despicable of them all, the comments section. Watching these young men and women recognize each other's struggles as they simultaneously calculate their next move, all while trying to maintain their humanity and their sanity, is equal parts heartbreaking and inspiring. The show is not afraid to touch on some pretty dark, often cruelly relevant topics, but never indulges so carelessly and obsessively that it loses that spark of light, of hope, that is still present in its characters. Following an aged-out child star as she reconciles with her past and wrestles with the risk of a new career path, or watching a soft-spoken but hardworking young woman get put through the emotional garbage disposal of public backlash for a simple mistake. It honestly feels really refreshing to see these issues acknowledged and explored without feeling cynical or defeatist. There's so much more I could talk about with the show too, from the way it breaks down casting decisions and the nuance of acting opposite of someone with a different skill level, to the unbelievable work and tireless effort that goes into being even passable on the Japanese idol circuit. This show is one of my favorites now, and a full-throated recommendation. That being said, the murder plot is kind of the least interesting part of the show, right? Kind of makes me happy that they barely touch on it. Honestly, just give me more raving babies. Golden Kamuy Season 4. Golden Kamuy is a goddamn treat. It's a violent, hilarious, eccentric treasure hunt story combined with the unbridled masculinity and eccentricity of JoJo with twice the homoeroticism and 10 times the amount of brain eating, all the while exploring Japan's indigenous Ainu culture in surprisingly reverent ways. But more importantly, floating bear explosion. Hell's Paradise. Hell's Paradise asks a rather interesting question. What would you do if you were practically immortal? Well, don't ask Gabimara the Hollow, because he just spends most of his time getting unsuccessfully burned at the stake, drawn and quartered, beheaded, and boiled alive. And he'd rather just be at home with his wife. But the shogunate will not abide a wife guy, nor his many crimes, and instead give him an ultimatum. Either face the sword and swordswoman that can finally actually end his life, or go to Total Drama Island in search of the elixir of immortality. Personally, I would embrace the blade. He is joined by Sagari, his would-be executioner and liaison, as well as a group of other ne'er-do-wells, given potential pardon for venturing into the titular paradise, which is also very much the titular hell. There, we find strange, violent, and unsettling phenomena, as this unearthly island surrounds them with monsters unsightly, obscene, and even silly, all of which are out for their blood. And at every turn, our cast of characters is fighting for their lives, and the show has no issues culling said cast to emphasize the danger. Through sharply directed and well-paced fight scenes, some effective character writing, and a plot that slowly opens up to reveal itself like a corpse flower, you're mesmerized and deeply disturbed by its dangerous wonders. Chief among them being the Sennin, a group of beings blessed not only with exceptionally long lives and the ability to regenerate, but even more fascinatingly, to change between the sexes, offering an intriguing gender play dynamic that they frequently indulge in while waxing philosophical. All of our main cast are multifaceted and engaging in their own right. I cheer for Sagari to grow stronger and find a resolve, for Gabimaru to embrace his role as the hero, and for Yuzuriha to keep providing some of the best fan service of the year. And I'm not even into that, but I'm right? Look, I am equal opportunity with my male gaze, even if I am one of the male gays.
Look at that. His method of killing is barbaric.
Would you prefer I made it look pretty?
Total sploosh!
Actually, yeah, gotta give him the sploosh.
And whatever my equivalent of sploosh is, which I guess is just sploosh. Only with semen.
Hell's Paradise is eager to dropkick you right out of your comfort zone and commit to the horror of its premise, pitting its principal cast up against terror after terror. The series does introduce its own brand of anime bullshit, seemingly as a way for the cast to better combat some of these more fearsome enemies, but it does seem to work within its own internal logic, tying directly into the villains and its world as a whole. It helps that, again, the combat is sharply directed. Though it's rather apparent partway through that MAPPA, the production company behind the anime, once again failed to schedule the production effectively, as many later episodes struggle to not only match the explosive quality of its opening arc, but feel lackluster in their own right. And this isn't even the only show on this list where that happens with MAPPA specifically. I also have to admit that finale leaves me a bit concerned with how the story is going to develop moving forward. Without spoiling too much, it invokes a particular trope I really hope they don't fall victim to, but I guess we'll see. Either way, I find myself impressed and fascinated by this stylishly morbid and harrowing story, and hope the series continues to bring us more of its surreal brand of dark fantasy. All Saints Street. This whole show is a precious treat that I highly recommend to anybody who's a fan of gorgeous animation, paranormal slice of life, and surprising man service. I feel targeted by this show, though admittedly it's mostly fluff with little substance, and some of its attempts at substance can be a bit undercooked, and even just unnecessary. But that's fine, because it still managed to delight me start to finish with its relatable and adorable cast. Undead Murder Farce. Depending on who you are, a name like Undead Murder Farce might conjure a wide variety of different imagery to mind. And impressively, it seems like the series is trying to find a way to match every single one. Its premise of an ex-demon hunting half-oni in an alternate universe Meiji-era Japan, traveling Europe while solving supernatural mysteries with a gun-toting maid and the disembodied talking head of a brilliant detective in a birdcage, partnering up and or competing with Sherlock Holmes and Arsène Lupin against Holmes' very own Moriarty, flanked by Carmilla the Vampire, Jack the Ripper, Aleister Crowley, and Frankenstein's monster is... Well, I'll say up front that it is worth the watch, if not just for its exceptional leading trio of Ayarindo, Suguru, and Shizuku. I'm a sucker for witty banter and big personalities playing off each other, and it's pretty impressive to watch a disembodied head manage to cut someone else down to size. The way they all complement and contrast, effortlessly volleying theories, retorts, and even Rakugo back and forth as if some classically trained Manzai trio is a treat. And as I said before, the public domain opens up like the elevators from The Shining, as our villains of the piece, a cavalcade of classics, choose to eschew chewing the scenery and instead tear it to pieces. Their personalities bold, exuberant, and greatly entertaining. Aleister Crowley throwing fire like a steampunk Roy Mustang, Carmilla seducing women as a blood-parched sexpot packing a Kenworth dump truck. It's all just so over the top and indulgent that you can't help but feel mesmerized. But none of this would work quite as well without the series' stellar direction and cinematography. From frame one, we're treated with spectacular transitions, creative camera angles, haunting visual metaphors, shifting and overlapping frames, and some standout art and animation, all confidently delivered to help give its wordier segments an abundance of flourish. It might not rival some of its contemporaries in terms of Saga, but it makes up for that with its impeccable sense of style. Of course, this is all nominally in service of the plot, and unfortunately I must admit that while many of its mysteries start strong, greatly expanding the world and introducing their major players and central conflicts, they, much like this sentence, tend to run long, and often lack that aha moment crucial to the genre. If it weren't for the standout character writing and top-notch direction, I doubt it would have made the list. But if you're looking for a stylish and exciting romp with exceptionally fun characters, then you're in for a treat with zombie death nonsense. Wait, no, that's Zom 100. And that is in honorable mentions. Zom 100. When I initially started this show, I was so excited. Its irreverent tone and wildly colorful animation made for one hell of a feel-good zombie affair. And while that tone could vary wildly, its bombastic nature and general upbeat approach made for a pretty fun ride. Until those last 3 episodes. I don't want to spoil why, because I made sure that I wouldn't have any spoilers in my honorable mentions, but let's just say production issues obviously affected both the animation and the writing. It's as ironic as it is sad that Zom 100's first episode features an exploitative company that is a direct and aggressive critique of OLM, only for the studio making this series to run into significant production issues halfway through. It's even apparent as early as the opening of the series, which wasn't finished until episode 9. But honestly, the art and animation are the least of the problems with this 3-part finale. Ultimately, while it doesn't necessarily ruin the series, it makes Zom 100 almost impossible to recommend. The vampire dies in no time. Okay, look, this is less about season 2 and more about the series as a whole. A vampire who's less into haunting the night and way more into gaming and dies at the drop of a hat. A successful but ill-tempered vampire hunter who, through happenstance, becomes his roommate. And the best character in all of fiction, praise be to John. Together, they're all joined by a collection of weirdos and doofuses as they protect the people of Shin Yokohama from slightly weirder doofuses. This is one of the funniest, silliest, and weirdly relatable anime I've watched in over a decade. Its comedic timing is top-notch, its characters are just the right amount of strange yet relatable, and while it's genuinely funny in both languages, I highly recommend the dub for its first season. I mean, I would recommend the dub for its second season, if it had one! Crunchyroll! Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2. The first season of Jujutsu Kaisen is, without a doubt, some of my absolute favorite battle shonen. Its horror aesthetic, combined with a nen-inspired power system, carried by spectacular characters and an intriguing conflict, all animated with as much love, care, and passion as possible, when MAPPA isn't driving their animators into the ground because of their inability to properly schedule their shit. And unfortunately, this season does suffer from that. While it's still a phenomenal watch from beginning to end, driving the despair and destruction into the stratosphere and giving us action that puts the rest of these shows on this list to shame, many animators have openly talked on social media about their frustrations and limitations this season due to crunch. And it does show in places, but instead of being upset at occasionally iffy art and animation, I would rather focus the ire on MAPPA's management, as they are the culprit here, and not the folks on the ground level killing themselves to deliver what is still, in spite of everything, a killer core of Jujutsu Kaisen. But in terms of the show itself, the Shibuya arc is a dark, twisted triumph. Its slow burn at the beginning is just the wick sizzling its way toward a mound of dynamite underneath a pile of bodies. And when it finally explodes, the level of carnage could make Chainsaw Man self-conscious. Jujutsu Kai lives in the misery and destruction, intent on dragging you to ever deeper depths as major mainstays are snuffed out and human life is as cheap as the average animator's salary. But through it all, our heroes must double and triple down, reinforcing their brutalized hearts, and as I said, while the conditions in which this masterwork was forged are inexcusable, their efforts should be celebrated, as this is an insane feat of television. The animation is off the charts, the fight choreography is mind-blowing, and the angles and camera work are wildly dynamic, disorienting when necessary and bracingly sharp otherwise. Many of these fights eagerly and expertly utilize the environment until they reach levels where the environment itself suddenly becomes yet another victim in the escalating onslaught, all while exploring, developing, and challenging its stellar cast and completely demolishing the status quo. But while I am more than happy to heap praise on its blistering combat and unflinching resolve to cut down its cast to horrifying and dramatic effect, the story does threaten to lose you as it seemingly punishes you for investing in its own cast. And while I was still holding my breath until the end, astonished by its climax, there was a bit of me that felt hollow, and not in the way I think it intended. Geike Akutami's steadfast dedication to real consequences in their story is undoubtedly a strength, not a weakness. But it can sometimes make it a struggle. And all of this might not have been an issue if the story had felt a little less uneven. Not that there isn't a harrowing, engaging story throughout. The slow unraveling of the Shibuya plot is masterful in its twists and turns, reaching a fever pitch near the end. And the tricks and techniques both sides whip out are as creative as they are disturbing. But it's hard to ignore some conveniences, and one might say contrivances, in service of the larger plot. But all things being equal, this season ramps up everything folks loved from season 1, giving us darkly dazzling death matches and ratchets up the stakes with unbridled confidence. In a year with visual splendor aplenty, Jujutsu Kaisen stands tall as an unmatched spectacle, setting up for even greater heights to come. It also gave us Kung Fu Action Rabbits. Seriously, Miffy is miffed. Little bro said catch these paws. Vinland Saga Season 2. I know, Vinland Saga in my honorable mentions, but look, the series is incredible. A slow burn story of war, revenge, self-hatred, masculinity, responsibility, justice, hate, and learning to forgive yourself and abandon hatred so you can finally stop perpetuating the cycles of violence that consume us in a world of conflict. A gorgeous score, some stellar animation, and Season 2 introduces Einar, the best new character, right beside Snake and his team, and Old Man Sverkel. And a nightmare sequence that could justify the entire season alone. It's a phenomenal story. But, I think the manga is just better. The pacing of the anime is so overwrought in every moment, feeling like its reverence for the source material borders on the obsessive. But all the while, the art and animation struggle to keep up. Specifically in this season, where MAPPA took over from Studio Wit, which they apparently keep doing. It's still great, but it got me reading the manga, and not because I'm impatient, but just because I flat out enjoy it more. Sorry, anime onlys. I adore the snow. I rarely get to see it, but there's something about the calm serenity and stark uniformity of it that fills me with wonder and comfort. Even though I'm ill fit for the cold, I jump at every chance I can to go out into that winter bounty whenever it's present, and then shuffle back inside when I inevitably start feeling my face go numb. It's a special treat for me. And it's also always short-lived. It falls, covers us with its white blanket, then inevitably disappears. The life of a snowflake, brilliant and complicated and unique. And so very short. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End is a story about those brilliant, complicated, and unique lives. It's about the lives of the titular Frieren the Elven Mage, Himmel the Hero, Eisen the Dwarf, and Hater the Corrupt Priest. It's about how they, together, defeated the greatest evil of their time, the Demon King, and became the celebrated legendary heroes. It's about how they parted ways and lived their lives. It's about how one of them would live for thousands of years, while the rest of them would not. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel about Frieren. The way it was slowly drip-feeding the backstory wasn't exactly hitting me like I believe they intended. Part of me wanted to see more of their journey early on instead of getting right into Himmel's death, to help give more context and emotional weight. But over its first core, Frieren and her new companions travel the countryside while flashing back to her original party, helping us understand how that historic journey shaped her. And before I knew it, every opportunity to look back at her time with those three filled me with joy and nostalgia for a life lived by someone else. After the isekai explosion of the 2010s, watching pure hard fantasy manga and anime make a huge comeback has been a treat. Frieren, ironically, stands tall as it slowly walks you through its world, exploring and musing about its many cultures and systems, and showing you how they've developed or even stagnated. Through full explanations or small observations, you're clued into this beautiful and sometimes terrifying world, all framed around Frieren. Frieren, on a technical level, is an absolutely stellar protagonist. Her soft-spoken, emotionally neutral attitude, combined with several lifetimes of experience that dwarfs even dwarves, makes her highly competent and self-sufficient. But her quirks are what make her truly special. After living longer than some nations have existed, and grown so strong she's practically uncontested in her time, she's become complacent in certain areas, and has let herself relax, giving her a general carefree attitude and a somewhat alarming lack of self-discipline. She has flaws, but they're all balanced out so wonderfully that she feels remarkably relatable, despite being anything but. And this is so important on her journey. She's not traveling with Stark and Fern, her will they won't they obviously they will warrior and mage companions, to go slay a demon king or stop the apocalypse, yet. No, their journey is personal. Her journey is personal. It's a way for her to explore her past by contrasting it with the present, to understand who she is, to understand what she is, beyond one of the legendary heroes. Of course, Fern and Stark are fascinating in their own rights, and in a lot of ways, we're seeing them grow up in real time, becoming adults before our eyes in startlingly resonant ways. Their arguments, their personal conflicts, their fears and their loves. Through masterful dialogue and careful pacing, everything just feels so real. Their flaws and arguments are consistent without feeling repetitive, and their growth is measurable. And maybe most importantly, they're all surprisingly funny, and in the driest ways. Even its physical comedy is subtle but highly effective, making this one of the funnier shows on the list, despite its otherwise emotionally reverent tone. They honestly feel like they're modeled after friends of the writer, and that's exactly how they should feel. On the production side of things, it's pure mithril to the core. Every episode is gorgeous, with brain-melting attention paid to even the most minute character acting. But it's the series' astonishing action sequences that manage to rival its contemporaries with a gigaflare, unbelievable attention to detail, moving backgrounds, and a general lack of CG across the board. The show's masterful use of match cuts to help mirror and/or contrast events both past and present is highly effective. And throughout, it's littered with small details, both narratively and visually. And the more attention you pay, the more you take away. Shout out to the Canapa Effect, by the way, for making a stellar video all about Frieren's animation. Give it a watch. All of this is accompanied by a pitch-perfect score, terrifically pleasant during the smaller moments, and stupendously bombastic when the action hits. And as of right now, it has two stellar opening songs, one by Yoasobi and the other by Yoroshika, two of my absolute favorite female Japanese artists. We are eating, and it is tasty. Speaking of the auditory, I do have to say, the dub is a masterpiece. I'm not going to start naming every character and their actor, but there is no weak link here. However, I do at least want to take one moment to recognize Mallory Rodak as Frieren. Her voice is noticeably deeper than the original Japanese, but in my opinion, she is, while not better, a perfect fit. Her telling Ara to keep herself safe is delivered so coldly, my organs froze over. Also, you gotta love the amount of characters in this show with big beards and no lip flaps. They're a blessing for both the writers and the actors. But again, it's all in service of the story. And Frieren is a story about life and death. As inevitable as it is ubiquitous and completely undiscerning. Death may come early, death may come late, but one day, it will darken your door. But for Frieren, someone who can live thousands of years and is uniquely powerful, she often views death as an abstract concept. It instills in her no sense of urgency, no panic or dread. For the longest time, she could barely conceive of a life so short that one would need to race against death. But it's with the loss of her closest friend that she is left to finally face that truth, and realize and recontextualize what all those moments with him and the rest of her party really meant, and what she's inherited. Because Frieren is a story about tradition, both cultural and personal. Within the world of Frieren, they talk at length about how cultural touchstones will rise and fall, the names of great heroes drying up on the lips of each new generation, and how even statues and monuments dedicated to the best of us will lose their meaning as time marches forward, unconcerned with the many lives that appear and disappear. But though names may be forgotten and monuments lose their meaning, we as people live on through others, and others live on through us. This story reflects on the past, and every moment that mirrors the present shows how even the smallest action from one person to another can have significant meaning. Without even noticing it, these little gestures, made in kindness or anger, can ripple out into our lives and beyond. We carry those moments, those memories, and they affect us and how we interact with others. And then, we too, in kind, change their lives. And so on and so on. And in this way, in these little moments, these little gestures, parts of us, even the smallest and seemingly indistinguishable from others, live on. We are the sum of our parts, and our parts reach back generations. I lost my father in August of last year. Complications from COVID. He was in the hospital one day and then suddenly gone in the middle of the night. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye. But one thing he told me that has stuck with me is that while he, an atheist, did not believe in any particular afterlife, he believed that we're all made of the same material from the beginning of time, and that, when we die, we return to the universe, a part of the greater whole. I don't know if I believe that myself, but I think it's a beautiful sentiment. And part of me is comforted by the idea that he is, in a way, still with me. That he carries on, that he is carried on in my heart, and in how he shaped me as a person. He lives on with me, and all the people whose lives he touched. Frieren Beyond Journey's End is a story about those brilliant, complicated, and unique lives, and about how little time we really have to live them. But not just our lives, but the lives of those we cherish most. And how before you know it, those snowflakes have melted, and the snow is gone, and you're only left with the memories. And that's it. We're finally finished. 23 shows. Although, technically about 40. I watched 40 TV shows in 2023, and I only read 2 books. Oh my god. Well, before I go and try and talk myself into finally starting Discworld, I'd like to say thank you. Thank all of you. This project was a lot of work. And honestly, it was a way for me to finally get back into writing this sort of stuff, because I love talking about media. And after the last couple of years and depression hitting dangerously hard, I finally feel like I can make this sort of stuff again. So, whether you were here from the beginning or joined in later, thank you for listening and for letting me vomit my gay furry brain into your lap like a sick cat. As always, please do comment on my vomit down below. Like, subscribe, ring the dingy thingy, but most of all, stay safe. And thank you all so much.